Hey, what's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 429. My name's Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, and as always, I'm joined by
Ron.
And if you two ever start fighting in front of me again, I'll kill you both. Understood?
Understood. How you guys doing?
Do you guys even know which character that was? It's from your pick, Steve.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which guy that was.
I think his name is Sergeant Shen.
Yes. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
I was going to say the actor. I looked him up as Song Jae-ho.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Type that or frisbee a chair at you to get out of line.
He loves him, but it's a tough love, Ronald. He loves his detectives, though.
Sometimes you need that.
Yeah.
But most times you do not.
All right.
In 2024. Let's be gentle with one another.
That's very true.
Let's hold that space.
Especially now.
Yeah.
We're all in kind of a tender moment
time
as a country.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you get really shitty candy when you go trick-or-treating.
Yes, that's what I meant.
That's
what I meant.
Obviously, yeah. There's nothing else you could possibly mean.
Nothing else on my mind at all. It's will I get crackle or will I get special dark?
Ooh. Yeah. These are the things, you look for that house with the full-size bars.
Yeah.
Jackpot, baby. Good to see you guys. We're going to get into the required viewing here in a hot second, but I think the rest of this episode, beyond some physical conversations that Ronald will get into in a bit, we're going to just, I guess, talk about whatever else we've seen. We saw The Substance, all of us, which at the time this episode comes out will be available on streaming.
Movie.
On Mubi, yeah, exclusively.
Yeah.
That's who acquired that film and
really
handled
cool.
the distribution for it. So it's kind of cool. So we'll talk about that and maybe a couple other things that we've seen in general, TV, movies. But let's just kind of jump into my pick for this week's required viewing was 2003's Memories of Murder. Again, like I mentioned last week, I felt like this movie kind of popped up every once and again here and there. For me personally, even before Parasite came out, but then once Parasite hit, and Bong and the movie kind of stormed the Oscars that year, it was just something, it's like everywhere you looked, it's like, oh, you haven't seen Memories of Murder, you got to see this. And, every article about Parasite kind of mentioned it. And in again, like in frames of reference, anything you're talking about, lists of serial killers, true crimes, procedural dramas, things like that in the last, 10, 15 years, the lists I've seen, it's always on the list, especially if it comes from a place that understands how to read subtitles. It's usually included. But so this was a good opportunity for me to get us all on board to watch. None of us had seen it. I think we've all been aware of what it was. But what you guys think of Memories of Murder? I guess, Ron, you want to jump?
I mean, yeah, man, I'm a pretty big Bong Joon-Ho fan, Okja, the host near Snowpiercer, Parasite, all those. I keep hearing that I need to see Mother, 2009's Mother, but never seen it. But I think what I've noticed about Bong is he just really good at creating atmosphere and interpersonal relationships and conflicts being created really quickly. And subverting expectations. I think that's one of the cool things that I noticed about this. Now, one thing I will say, it's a little on the longer side. This investigation takes quite a while, but it has a lot of twists and turns. And, I kind of love the idea of something I say a lot, and it's no offense to anybody, but, police officers, doctors are just doing jobs. And sometimes you realize that people get a little restless and bored of what they're doing. And sometimes it could be procedural. It could be just like, it's like, hey, walk in, take advice. It looks, smells, and feels like something that's familiar. So that's what it is. And, it kind of attacks that idea of a grizzled vet being challenged by this young guy that comes from Seoul as questioning everything this cop's doing. But he
has like a country detective meets city detective, and it could be a much more predictable kind of buddy cop movie, but you're right, it's not.
And I love that clash. Like and I forget. I always forget because it sneaks up on me. As funny as his movies can be, Bong Joon-Ho really knows how to get as sad as humanly possible and really attack some of those like visceral feelings when people get hurt or are in danger or, it's just, yeah. There's always one innocent person that gets beat up for no reason. It always happens in every movie. It bothers me so bad. But yeah, it just, I cared about it. I guess that's what I mean. I cared about all the characters. It's one of the better atmospheric movies that I've seen. Like, I really got so nervous whenever you see a woman go out in the rain once that song is played. It's like these, it's just this atmosphere that he creates that I was just really down for. You could kind of feel the textures. Like, I felt like I was there with them. And I don't know if I feel like that in every movie. I also felt like that in Parasite. When they're like in the like the house and it feels dirty and it just you feel all of it, and I'm just very happy to have seen it. I'm glad you suggested it. I thought it was incredible. Thought the acting was great. I really enjoyed it.
Very good.
Yeah.
John?
I would second a lot of what Ronald said. I think that when you say subvert expectations, Ronald, it's an interesting thing because I made a note about that, and I was like trying to think of how to phrase it. But when you think about subverting expectations, it's like to be a smart filmmaker who's using that method of storytelling.
Yeah.
You have to know what expectations you're setting up, and you have to know what you're subverting. You have to have a step ahead of the audience kind of thinking, or a couple steps ahead. And I think that that's an interesting thing because this is a genre, the sort of cop thriller where plot twists and unpredictable story elements and characters who aren't what you think they are, that's the lifeblood of this type of story. So you're already dealing with a viewer that's like going, oh, how are they going to catch the killer? Even though this film does have a sort of procedural aspect of being very close to, in the cultural memory at the time in Korea, apparently, of actual murders from about a decade previous, in the mid 80s, I think into the 90s, that there were like 10 murders that happened in rural areas and some of the details were the same. So I think for those folks, that this movie was reminiscent of that. So it may have felt more like a kind of somber procedural. And it does have that element, but it's also got the clues and the detectives and the what kind of killer is it, and are we really seeing the killer, or do we know what we think we know? And instantly the movie starts, like you said, turning those things 1 degree different from where you're expecting a twist, but you don't get the twist you think you're going to get. Right from the start. What's his name from he was in Parasite as well, I believe. The main guy, Song Kang-ho, he was in Parasite, right?
Yep.
Like, you start off instantly with him going like, oh, I kind of like this guy, and then instantly going, wait a minute, maybe I don't like this guy, because he's like falsifying evidence, or at least using fake evidence to badger this poor guy that they've kind of pegged for the crime, and very quickly, I don't know, just the way like you said, these things are established so quickly, and then they're turned on their head so quickly, and so within a half hour, you can tell just based on the rhythms of this, you're not watching the usual thriller, but it still is firing on those pistons. It's still going like, well, but we're going to keep the thriller elements going in as much as you can have a stalking scene in the middle of the movie that is really well done and scary. That scene with the woman walking near I think it's like a mine or a factory or whatever, processing plant or something, and she's walking on like a little path through the field, and she's being stalked, and then she breaks into a run, and I don't know, there's just so many things going on that are showing that mastery of the genre stuff, but also showing that the real interest is in, the atmosphere and the textures. The way he lingers on a scene, there's a few times where he just lets you feel there's like a shot of two people sitting there, and you'll get to see a little bit more of their environment, and there'll be so much detail. And it's the photography, I think, that's amazing in this movie, as well as the acting, that brings that stuff to life, because it really does feel both sort of heightened and sort of immersive and believable in that way. So I think, in terms of that, I kind of knew it would be good, but I was still continually surprised by it. And I also think of the things that are sort of that I thought at first, oh, this is a little goofy, I'm ahead of this, I found out later, oh, that was intentional. That was there to make you feel like you knew what kind of story you were getting. And in the end, it's got this bleak, meditative kind of ending that's all about the nature of ambiguity and how you'll never know. And it reminded me of how at the ending of The Pledge, Jack Nicholson's character is in a situation where it's after the fact. It's like an epilogue, and you're seeing that like he will never know what happened. And in that movie, we have a little bit of a privilege of maybe thinking we know what happened, but the character who was after this all along will never really know. And this movie has that. I mean, it's a sad, weird, meditative ending where he's stopping by where they found the body, and the little girl talks to him and gives him this information that just makes him realize, like, if he didn't already realize, we may not have caught the guy. We'll never know. Like there's just not enough information. And when he asked, what did the man look like? And she said he was kind of ordinary looking or whatever. It's just sort of, I don't know. It's like, there's something super sad about that. And it's a scene happening in broad daylight between a man and a nice little girl on a little country road. It's not a creepy, it's not using the usual tools of being creepy. It's just, this guy lives his life in the aftermath of this awful thing that happened. And, I think it's also very interesting that the character we stay with at the end is the guy who you thought earlier might be the one that would be like, this guy's a loose cannon, but he's the one who later has a family and has kind of moved on. And we don't really know what became of the more serious-minded detective who seemed more honest, but also seemed more dark and intense. So, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I think like you said, Steve, I would have eventually watched this just because it came up. And it was on my radar, but I was glad to finally have the nudge. And Bong Joon-Ho just knows how to make a good-looking, interesting movie. It makes me realize that I haven't really scratched the surface of all the stuff he's done, I don't think. Although I love The Host, and I love Parasite, and I guess now I'll say I love this.
Yeah, I feel like the things you guys have mentioned is everything that I mean, the atmosphere definitely stands out. And I mean, the things that really kind of jumped to me, and this was very clear in any of the films that you guys have mentioned of his, specifically Parasite, like the little details of the characters, because this is kind of doing what a lot of these movies, I guess you could compare it to Seven. A lot of people say that comparison in Zodiac, in the sense that you do spend a lot of the time with the movie not only solving this mystery and chasing the serial killer, but like it's really about the characters that are doing that. And their interrelationships with one another, with the crime, with the the mystery of it all. But that approach to it is not something that he has. He's not the only one doing that. But the way that he approaches that by having those details, like the character you mentioned, like little details, like the guy wrapping cloth around his foot before he like drop kicks somebody during interrogations, to not like when he's like beating them up so that he doesn't like leave a scar of his boot on it. Like crazy little details like that are so thoughtful and thought out that it really kind of paints that character, with something so strong and vivid with only a few scenes in the movie, you know what I mean? Yeah. And that kind of sets you on a path of wanting to know, to better understand them. You have an idea, and that's kind of where you subvert that stuff where we end up in the movie, and which character goes left when you thought they'd go right, or things of that nature, because you start to be curious, to become curious. And, when those kind of paths divert a little bit from your guessing or, where you think the movie might be going, and there's there's a handful of twists in this movie that are pretty exciting. And I don't know, man, I just love the pacing of it. It's like so bleak and so moody. And yeah, like you guys have kind of hit a lot of the feelings I had, but it definitely settles into those that like, that hierarchy of these kinds of movies for me as being like pretty amazing. And, the characters are great. It looks beautiful. The way the movie starts, with the detective and the kid, and just the way they approach the scene that he's at and what he's helping the kid with. It's like there's so many minor decisions that are so high quality for the characters in the movie, which is really why this movie works so well. Yeah, there's some great like scenes, like sequences that are kind of disturbing or kind of off-putting a little bit, but nothing like consistently or continually shocking or unsettling. But I think that allows for those scenes, when they do occur, to feel more like that, because it's not something you're being hit over the head with, or the movie's not relying on that, and I feel like that's such a mark of a really great filmmaker, the way to avoid some of the trappings that some of these movies kind of settle into.
But by lulling you into thinking you're watching that kind of movie and that it's like
Yes.
kind of popcorn entertainment, I feel like that's something
Yeah.
Bong Joon-Ho does. Like he knows how to tap that thing where you're like, even The Host is a much more unconventional storyline than what you would think, but it delivers the monster movie that you think you might be getting. But it's much more about the sort of family relationship. So.
And also just like, and again, this is not unique to this, but the way it goes about kind of showcasing or talking about, the police interrogations and how they're wrong, and how they, lead to incorrect information, to how they don't know how to secure a crime scene, to collecting evidence wrong, or not having enough staff to do it all. Like these little details that like ultimately, contribute to some of that ambiguity that the movie ends with. And also just like all of these situations that we see in movies like this, it's not unique, but the way that they kind of present it with these exciting and, interesting characters make those things really kind of pop for me, and you see it happening, like, man, are you kidding me? Like you have that kind of reaction to a scene like that, and you realize, oh man, this is going to send them down a path that's the wrong path.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always like, as a viewer, you're doing something right, I think, when you're engaged to that point that you're having that kind of reaction to like to foresight, or to be able to see ahead of these characters, which is it's kind of cool.
To be like disappointed in their behavior.
Yes, exactly.
Where you're like, don't do that.
Totally.
But the way, what's the guy's name? Back, the guy who they just victimized, basically. That poor guy who gets hit by the train.
Oh man!
Oh my god!
I mean, his story is so sad because he does say some pretty outlandish things, and he's got a wild streak to him, but he's played with the kind of innocence. And I feel like in a lot of movies that character could be seen almost as a trope that's a little bit offensive. But to me, it felt like it really was like the humanity of that character was such a clear thing that it was so terrible. I mean, we talk about these things they're doing that are like pushing the line. Like I think that like, or crossing the line. I think that, like out and out corruption and like torture of suspects and stuff, that's pretty awful. But what's weird, Steve, is kind of what you were saying that's interesting is the movie does frame it pretty instantly as like, and Ronald, you were getting at this too, these are like overworked people who may be underqualified or prepared, who are trying to do their job. Like there is, even though they're doing awful stuff, and again, I'm not saying, I'm not apologizing for police brutality in the movie, but the movie is not propaganda. It's making you think about all this, and it's saying it's like this is a 2003 movie, so it's like it's right ahead of that swell of like anti-hero stories that we love so much on prestige television. So it's like it wasn't a huge trope yet, or at least not as overused as it would seem now, to say, oh, these are complicated, flawed kind of assholes. You're not supposed to look up to them. But I also love like even the way the younger detective, Seo, when he's introduced, the way that he's introduced as a character, we don't really know who he is. He does seem to be kind of following this woman or talking to this woman. Then the cops jump out of the bushes basically and beat the shit out of him before finding out he's another detective investigating this space. And it's a daytime scene on the road, but it gets you into the procedural side of what they do with like almost a black comic element tied in with the very serious tone in a lot of ways. I don't know. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it would be strange at this point to think you have to point out that Bong Joon-Ho is good at this. But he makes pretty good. He makes really interesting. That Mickey 17 looks pretty fun to me too.
It does.
So I'm ready.
Fun. I was going to ask you guys, I kind of dropped a couple earlier that it always comes into conversation with, but if I were going to ask you which films are on your Mount Rushmore for, these kinds of serial killer mystery, you can say procedural, whatever you want to say, but that kind of fit in with this film. What are three top of the line movies you'd recommend that kind of fit in this world?
I will say it. This is off the top of the dome. I'm just spitting.
Go.
The Pledge.
Do it. Okay.
Prisoners.
Okay.
And Silence of the Lambs.
Perfect. Ronald?
Silence of the Lambs. Oh, this is killers. Oh my god. I just bought Silence of the Lambs. What else?
You know, there's a million you're not thinking of that are just great movies that
I
have a
know.
murder mystery element in them, or a thriller element. Those are just
Watchmen.
okay. Ooh.
Watchmen. I think about that murder scene in the beginning, like it is burned into my brain. Like just how intricate it was, and the TV playing and kicking a person. Like, how much force do you need to kick a person out of a window, by the way? It's just an insane thing to think about.
Plus a big dude.
Plus a big dude that's like double your size. That's crazy. Watchmen.
So Sons of the Lambs, Watchmen, and one more.
One more.
Yeah.
No pressure. Whatever comes to mind.
Why can't I think of anything with a killer in it?
You blocked it out.
Dog Bites Man.
Oh.
That's a weird one.
No, that's a good one though. That's a good one.
Man Bites Dog or
Man Bites Dog.
Man Bites Dog.
I think Man Bites Dog, because the old line is dog bites man, that's not a story, but
Yeah.
Man Bites Dog, that's a story.
Now you got a scope.
Yeah, I think it is like a newspaper man. It's like an adage. What is that? How do you say that word? ADAGE. A dodge.
Dodge, I think.
Dodge.
Yeah.
A truism.
I said 2 of my 3. I said Seven and Zodiac.
Mhm.
But the third one I'd mention is one of my, honestly, all these movies are probably in my top films of all time, but LA Confidential.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Is it gives me this similar vibes to this, with the characters, specifically with the characters, like these cops and the different strings of life that they're currently on and coming from and going towards. And I love that intersection of, like, specifically the Russell Crowe, Guy Pearce characters, the young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed detective and the kind of weathered muscle detective. That's just like explosive. Like they're amazing.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite movies ever. And some of the relationship between these detectives kind of reminded me of that clashing of the approaches and just where they come from is really cool.
Man,
There's some other recommendations if you watched along with this. If you haven't seen any of those other films, but I mean, those are all great picks. Another one that someone mentioned at one of the videos I was watching, which was I didn't forget about this movie, but the connection or the comparison was pretty good. Was Nolan's Insomnia.
Oh yeah.
Which
I feel like that's an underrated movie.
It is.
I know some people that really disliked that, and I thought it was strange because I found it incredible. And it's similar to the way that Memories of Murder and The Pledge. It's like it's got that haunting thing going for it.
Yes. Like the movie exists like in a fog almost,
but it's like the way the characters are haunted by being around this murder, and you feel like no one escapes.
Yeah,
like no one escapes without a mark on their soul, from this kind of thing.
Totally.
The sadness. What about the sadness? I saw that in the movie.
I haven't seen that.
It's one of it's one of those small town, everybody dies sort of.
The sadness?
I think it's called The Sadness. And it's about a killer in a town. And
I'll throw one more out there. Since Ronald had Silence of the Lambs, I might just say, just to keep things diversified, I'm going to throw The Talented Mr. Ripley out there, the OG Talented Mr. Ripley.
It's a good one.
Sadness is coming back as a zombie horror movie.
What?
That's not right?
No. It's from.
We'll have to dig into this later. But I'm liking what you're saying. We've got to find the movie. That's all. All right, man. So where are we at? You got to pick, Ronald. Where are we going with you?
Oh no, it's my turn.
Oh, John. Sorry, I said that in the pre-episode. I don't know.
It goes alphabetically. It's a handy way to think of it. So yeah, I had a lot of choices, and there was one that I was going to put on just because it was related to a discussion we were having recently about all the Halloween movies, and we were talking about David Gordon Green getting taken off of the Exorcist franchise and Mike Flanagan going on. And I actually was a year two ago, a guy invited me to go on his podcast to talk about The Exorcist 2, The Heretic. And I was like, oh, cool. But that never happened. And so I was like, I'm going to make Ronald and Steve watch that. But then as we got closer to this, I read up on it, and it's rumored to be one of the worst movies ever made. And based on the week we are in our lives, I don't know if I want to watch the worst movie ever made right now, so I will spring The Heretic on you guys at some point in the future, or Exorcist 2, The Heretic, on you at some point in the future. But I thought it would be fun to go for a more reliably entertaining movie, a brisk 90-minute film about a giant blob, you might say, that devours people. And so, of course, I'm talking about the 1988 remake of The Blob, directed by Chuck Russell, starring Kevin Dillon. It's an attempt to make a star out of Kevin Dillon. Shawnee Smith, yes.
Yeah.
And it's also relevant, I'll just say this as a little tease, that it's also relevant to the conversation people were having after Terrifier 3 opened up this whole discussion of whether kids should be killed brutally in films. And people were saying it's, crosses the line to show a kid getting killed. And I think anyone who's seen Chuck Russell's The Blob instantly thought, well, that's been going on for a long time. Terrifier's not the first movie to brutally kill a kid. Okay. So yeah, but I think this is just a movie that I have not rewatched in probably decades. But at the time, it was at the height of my kind of like being into the Fangoria side of it all, the effects, and I do feel like the deaths in this are like, you're not just seeing people get consumed by a blob, you're seeing them get like painfully dissolved by a blob. So I recall it being a pretty wild movie. So.
Spoiler alert, I love this movie.
Oh, good.
Okay.
I watch this movie at least once a year.
Oh, awesome.
Like, genuinely,
I haven't seen
Chuck Russell obviously did Dream Warriors, Nightmare 3.
Yeah.
And a few years after this, he does The Mask.
And both this and Dream Warriors were co-written by Frank Darabont as well. So that's another element.
Cool.
No, this is great, man. I almost went to, they have a special thing every year, or maybe it was one of the recent anniversaries for it. They had a special event where you could like go see the in like a single screen marquee house, and they had a bunch of people from this movie there, and I was like this close to buying tickets to go see it. It was like a whole like a convention, I guess. It was like a convention like around this film, and maybe even around where it was filmed. I can't remember the details of this, but I almost went to it. This was in the last like 5 years, 6 years. But yeah, this is great, man. I love this movie so much. Can't wait to watch it again.
Okay. Cool. Steve, the movie I was thinking of is called The Wailing.
Oh, The Wailing.
The Wailing.
Yeah. I know that one. I haven't.
Saw that in the movies with Aaron.
See that one? That was yeah, I don't know. I know the one. I definitely know who you're talking.
The Sadness is also a very good movie, but that is a zombie movie. You're right, but it kind of watched them around the same time. That's why
I feel like I remember you talking about The Wailing on the podcast. Did that make your list that year?
I think it did.
Yeah, I feel like someone talked about it on a
serious murder mystery. It's
crazy. I got it on the list now.
Okay, cool.
All right, cool, man. Well, thanks, John. That's a great pick. I can't wait to watch it. And where did we look at the? Did we look at where it's what the availability is of the Blob? For those watching, looks like it's Paramount Plus.
Yeah,
Paramount Plus, Peacock.
Really?
And Pluto TV.
Yeah.
Oh, so you got some free options, some paid options.
Yeah. And if you want to rent it, it's only a couple bucks on all of the standard platforms. So it's there, man. Let's do this. Find it. Cool. All right, cool. Ronald, you want to get physical?
Yes.
Let's get physical. Come Ron and get physical. There you go.
Not made by Steven Spielberg, but I consider it a Steven Spielberg under the umbrella.
Oh, I think I know. I saw the flash of it. I know that poster. That's a great poster.
The problem is with these movies is sometimes American companies just don't release them. So leave it up to Australia and Imprint Films to put out Batteries Not Included. Batteries Not Included. Come on, damn it.
That's a Drew Struzan poster. You know that guy.
Yeah, we got it. We got it. There was a shot there of it somewhere.
There was a shot. Yeah. So
no, we saw it. It wasn't blurring it out. It was just not quite in focus.
Oh, so it wasn't focused. Yeah. So batteries not included. Imprint release. I'm a big fan of Imprint in general. I haven't opened this up yet, but I'm pretty excited about it. There's a few interviews, like recent interviews on here, where they talked to Matthew Robbins,
Brad Bird, wasn't he
Mick
involved
Garris. I don't see.
Am I wrong?
Yes. Screenplay by Brad Bird.
Yeah.
So Matthew Robbins is talking about writing it, and Mick Garris. This is crazy. I didn't realize that all the material on this is from this year.
I think it was going to be an episode of Amazing Stories, the Steven Spielberg anthology show, and then got like picked up to be a movie. Got promoted. So, like Steven Spielberg thought it had juice, and it may have even been like from a story by him. Is that right? Is it like story by Steven Spielberg or something? I feel like it's one of those that came out of that era when he was kind of producing, it's like presented by Steven Spielberg or produced by Steven
Mick
Spielberg.
Garris.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Executive produced by Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah, it's all those
Steven
folks.
Spielberg.
It's all the folks that stuck around later. But I mean, this was the era where there was like a Spielberg feel, and there were a lot of people like working, like junior Spielberg devotees that were working in that style. It's an interesting thing, like a new B movie, elevated B movie, pulpy stuff. It was such a great. I mean, at that age, I was like 12 or 13 or something when that stuff was hot. So I loved it.
Oh man, yeah, this is great. It's so weird, like the way you set that up, and like the fact that these movies just don't have, like, it's like a random company in Australia or UK or wherever the hell, Germany. You've gotten some like that's where they get a hold of it. I don't know if it's because of licensing things or what, and like they get weird, they release something that is that high quality, with the features. Like it's just, I mean, it's great, clearly, but it's just wild to me.
Arrow Video just announced Demolition Man.
I saw that.
That wouldn't be like super popular for a big label, but like people are going ape shit for this movie. Like they're like, oh my God. And it's, it's going to have good content. And these companies have kind of become junior Criterion collections. You know what I mean? They kind of see Criterion has these documentaries and stuff, and these private labels are like kind of outdoing them in a lot of ways. Like Arrow is becoming people's Criterion now, which is
amazing.
Well, I mean, because they do sometimes movies, it's a little bit more open what kind of movies they can do in a way. Even though Criterion seems to be pretty open to some pretty
now they
movies.
seem to be loosey-goosey. I don't know what's happening right now, but
no, I like the idea that movies are getting, that there's a reason for movies to get this kind of red carpet treatment of all the bonuses and the that's great. So I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have something else physical, Ronald?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, well, I'm going to rattle off a few quick things just because I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show. I know I posted online about it, but I've just some books that are film related or vaguely in that zone or Halloween related. The book I Spit on Your Celluloid. Have I mentioned this on the show?
No, that's a cool name.
It's The History of Women Directing Horror Movies by Heidi Honeycutt.
Wow.
And it goes back.
Cool.
It's like super, full of like illustrations and posters and stills. And it goes back. I've just started dipping into it. It starts in like 18. There's a movie called The Cabbage Fairy that may have been produced in 1896 by a female director. And if so, it was the first narrative film produced that they have on record, but some people think it may have been produced a few years later, which means it wouldn't have been the first. But either way, it goes back that far to an early silent film, and it goes through, recent movies. Like the image on the cover is taken from The Love Witch, the Anna Biller film from just a few years back. So I don't know. It's a very dense survey. So I don't know how quickly I can read a book like that might just be a lot of like vignettes about different movies and different directors. But I don't know. Maybe it will have more of a narrative. But just in terms of a resource and a thumb through it book and go to the index and look things up, it's already been a great book to have around. So yeah, I Spit on Your Celluloid. Heidi Honeycutt is the author. I also have this has been out for a while, but I've been wanting to dig into it. Out There Screaming, the anthology of it's black horror authors. It's edited by Jordan Peele.
Wow.
It came out a while back. I think it's only recently in paperback. That's where I saw it. So I know a few of the authors in this, and they're great. And yeah, I can't wait to finish it. But it's what I've read from it is awesome too. And the last book I have on my Let's Get Physical segment is a book called Satanic Panic: Pop Cultural Paranoia in the 1980s. It's all about it's another like copiously illustrated book, that goes into all of the stuff with the sort of moral majority being convinced that kids were being influenced towards evil through entertainment. So,
Right.
heavy metal, horror movies, video games, Dungeons and Dragons, all of that stuff got vilified. They all had their turn getting vilified by the religious right in the 80s. And some of it got connected to real or false crimes. There was a general paranoia about Satanism and rituals, and there were movies made that kind of played off of it. There have been documentaries. So this book really seems to lay all of that out. It's just called Satanic Panic. So I think that'll be appropriate for folks, since this episode is sort of our unofficial Halloween episode. Those are all 3 horror adjacent selections.
Thank you for telling me about Out There Screaming. I'm just putting that on my Audible wish list.
Oh yeah, I bet I wonder if it's all one
Holy
reader or if you get different people reading. But I bet
says
the Audible of that is pretty
full
good.
cast. It looks like there's a full cast of readers.
I love when they do that.
That sounds really cool. Aha.
So we all watched The Substance.
Yeah, what you guys think of The Substance?
We're talking about The Blob next week.
Are you trying to
talk
activate?
about The
You guys wanna
Substance.
activate?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's activate.
Oh,
What could
man.
possibly go wrong?
Or terminate? I don't know.
Ronald,
Yeah.
you were the most recent one to watch this, and you were the reason we held back this was so that we all could have seen it. So would you tell us, why don't you start us off? Would you, after seeing that film, would you start the regimen?
No, absolutely not. Man, look, everybody, you guys know I'm quite the bitch when it comes to graphic horror. A very specific level of it. Like I'm squeamish.
Mm-hmm.
This was a masterpiece. This movie is a masterpiece, and I don't know what it is about it. It's like the fact that it's shot like a music video. It's like hyper real looking. I don't know what kind of camera they use for this thing, but Demi Moore, to do this feels so brave for some reason. Like, I don't know why I felt this like, holy shit, I love that she's getting dirty and grimy and disgusting and making ugly faces. Man, I'm so shocked by how much I love this movie that, and I loved the other version of her, the younger version of herself. I haven't really seen, she seems like a Nepo baby. She's a Nepo baby, isn't she?
Margaret Qualley, yeah, that's
I don't know if she is.
that's Andy McDowell's daughter.
Okay.
But just these performances.
I think the Nepo baby thing goes away if you seem to be maybe a more talented actor than your parent.
Yeah,
So we'll just have to see.
That's
got him.
There you
But yeah, there's something about what Demi Moore choosing to do this at this point of in her life, the messaging behind it. I've never watched something that felt so like predictable but unpredictable in the way that it works on 2 levels. You're watching it, you know what's going to happen, right?
Sure, you see it, yeah.
This subverting whole thing that's kind of becoming like a thing I love. You think it's going to end one way, and then it goes way crazier than you expect it to go. And I think maybe that's the cure for something being predictable. Like, it's going to happen. From the beginning, and the way that they present all the information, it's very clear that this is going to go awry. But how is it going to go awry?
Right. I think that's the thing. Like, the knowing what happens is a spoiler, and I don't like people spoiling shit for people and telling them it doesn't matter. I hate when people say, "Oh, it doesn't change your enjoyment of the movie to know what happens," and that's your basis for spoiling this. I don't like that. But I do think it's true that what happens is almost never as intriguing as how it happens.
Yeah,
or
sure.
even more so than that, how this director, this actor, this whatever, how they're depicting it. There's like
Yes.
several levels of interest, and this is a movie that has a sort of interesting what happens, but it's really interesting how it's depicted. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's masterfully made. Even someone who was repulsed by this movie and thought it was disgusting would probably have to admit it's disgusting because of how beautifully made it is. And yes, the gore, the whatever you want to call it, the body horror, it's extreme. Like you say, you're squeamish, Ronald. I'm not like not squeamish. I just like movies that go for something, right? I like extremes sometimes. And I think this movie, there were moments where I was like, oh boy, like we're cutting into skin and we're just watching it. You know, we're not like the camera's not being merciful to our eyes at all. So yeah, this movie, I think I had this a similar visceral reaction to what you had. So don't think just because you're sort of our relative horror newbie that somehow this movie is not a potent
I screamed a couple times like, oh god.
I think I definitely went ugh a couple times.
And weirdly enough, it was like the basic stuff that was really bothering me, like a nail or like out of all the things, I'm like, why is this nail bothering me? Or like just old things being on a table, or like it's like, why are they doing this to me? Or like the meat being like, it's just that scene where she's cleaning. It's so fucking good. And it reminds me of just how intentional you can be about the message is very obvious on some levels. And it still feels very powerful. It still feels like, damn, I feel like people can really learn something about this. Learn something from this.
It's obvious, but don't you think the movie, by the time it gets to the end, it's like, if you think the movie's beating you over the head with the themes from the start. So you're not like some genius if you get ahead of this movie's themes, you know. But as far as what you get at the end is like, both generations are part of this awful, like, it's not just about being old and being obsessed with being young. It's also about how the young kind of feed on the old and don't necessarily understand or respect those boundaries. So I don't know. It's. I think by the time it gets to the end, even if it is kind of like on the nose, like super on the nose, it's like it's the first movie to be like, this movie's on the nose. Guess what? It's now doing. It's ripping your nose off and like playing around in the hole in your face and then putting on a new fake nose. You know, I mean, it's like it's by the time it gets to the end, it isn't just about like what you think it is at the beginning, which is like an obsession with being young. It's also about like the shallowness of being young in a strange way, you know, but it gets at it, like the fact that Sue, the Margaret Qualley character, is just as much of a character as the Demi Moore character is, I think is sort of where the subversion exists. You might think that it's all about Demi Moore loving this life, you know, this new life she has, but the fact that Sue is almost like a different entity. It doesn't seem like her enjoying a young life. It seems like a young person who doesn't want to be held down by this old lady anymore. And I think that's the body horror of just her aging, like when her arm is aging, that stuff was extreme. Yeah. Anyway, I agree with you, Ronald. I think that I may not have had that statement of like, I love this movie yet in my head, but as far as admiring how it's made and being blown away by the potency of it, and also completely disgusted by it, I think this movie, it hit me in all of those places. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I thought it was incredible. Love Demi Moore. Both of them are just incredible in it. Dennis Quaid, I think, is even really good in it. I mean, he's so good. That's the role that I think Ray Liotta was cast for before he passed.
He would have been great in that. I think
he was supposed to be that character. But yeah, I don't know. Like the body horror stuff is just fucking awesome, and I just love, like, John, you kind of got at it there. When you were saying like. The reach of the young for the old. I mean, the reach of the old for the young, and then like the feeding of the young on the old. That literal and figurative statement in this film is so well presented. And yeah, I think that when you kind of watch this movie and you know you get this idea of like these two, like a shared consciousness between these versions of this character, like between between Elizabeth and Sue, and the fact that like neither kind of know what the other one's doing, right? When they're in their time and they're in their 7 days, but they begin to pick up on what they're doing. Like when Sue sees, junk food and, shit all over the apartment and just like complete waste laid to this, place that she now also lives in. And when Elizabeth sees the billboard and like the New Year's stuff and all the advertising for the new workout program, like I like how you piece together these two characters who are the same shared consciousness.
You are one. Don't forget you're one, or whatever they say.
Yeah, like just learning about each other, and there is no her and you, like you're one, and that was all so good, so good. And I mean, honestly, we talk a lot about like, again, you both have said this already in a different way, but like, you know what this movie is and you know where it's going, but you really don't know how big of a swing it's taking in the last like 15 minutes of this movie. Like when the shit hits the fan, it is hitting the fan and splattering quite literally over everything within reach. And I loved it, every bit of it. Opening scene to end scene. I thought this was just a great movie. So entertaining, so slick, looked gorgeous. Screenplay is incredible. This is a great film.
Yeah, it feels like a cautionary tale, like a proverb or something. Like almost
like a fable. Yeah,
like a fable, almost the way that like Witch kind of was, like a fable. Like it's like a real good cautionary tale about what you do if you mismanage the ability to, I don't know.
And it works so well. Like that idea works so well because of the little twist in the sense that they're not aware of the other's life. Even though they're the same person, their physical bodies are different, and deciding what they do in those bodies is unique to that person when they're in that body. Like that idea is really just cool. so creative, honestly. And I feel like that the gap between them that should be bringing them closer to what they both want, it just drives them further apart when they start to learn about each other. And especially the control that the younger Sue has over Elizabeth in terms of fucking building a room to hold her in, to keep the body in instead of the bathroom, and how she decides to stay longer than she should. I mean, those things just are so they're just like dripped out so perfectly.
They're dripped out. They're oozed out.
Literally.
No, I was just picturing that little aperture in her back that gets more and more like sore and like
it just gets
infected. It's
sore and yellow.
Gross.
And
It kind of feels like,
but she's continuing to inject that shit. That's the part that's crazy, where she's looking at that going like, okay, this is the best I can do.
Whatever.
And then the texture of the liquid change. But I guess the idea is like, if you want youth, you also get that brain that you had back then too, like that, like
the drive.
As a kid, man, I was like so inconsiderate in a lot of ways that I'm just not inconsiderate anymore. I mean, we all kind of have our blind spots, but
and the thing that's tough is that it's tough for a younger person to hear that, because when you're young, you don't think you're being that. Because I remember being young and thinking, as they used to say that when I was a kid, they used to say, "Oh, kids, you think you're going to live forever?" And I was like, that's fucking stupid, old man. No one thinks that. I don't know anyone my age who thinks that. But now that I'm an older man, I think back and it's like, yeah, I kind of did think I was going to live forever. Like, I know what they meant. Like, that was a shorthand for what was going on. But like, when you're a kid, no one wants to hear you're being rude, you're being inconsiderate. It just sounds like the stupidest thing to worry about. Like, get over it, Not that I was just like that guy, but I know what you mean, Ronald. Like, you're not aware of like the way that if you're having your issues as a teen, like anyone in the vicinity is fully aware of what's going on. And you may think you're just living your life and you don't realize you're affecting people, And that's not to say that you're a bad person. It's like a natural stage we all go through. And that's why there's so much cringing involved in being a parent, because you remember now what you were doing. You realize what your parents went through.
I really did. Like, that choice. Like, if you're like, hey, you can stay young for longer, you just gotta fuck up the old version of yourself.
Right. You got to take this away from old you. Right. That's crazy. Yeah.
Sure. Fuck that person. It's like, especially younger. Oh, God, man. Yes, it's cool.
No, that's an extra element to it too that we just came up with, is that idea that when you have these adventures and experiences when you're younger, you're like like what you're doing is totally laying down the circumstances of the old version of you. Like I sometimes, as a middle-aged guy, think back on young me and I'm like, hey, good job, young me. And other times I'm like, what the fuck were you thinking?
Oh, you'll reach up, you're like, oh, I did fuck my hand up when I was a teenager for no reason. I just jumped over a fence and then my hand got caught. I could have walked around. It's just Crazy.
I wonder if in the movie Elizabeth is like if she's setting herself up for a fall, it's by virtue of trying to keep things perfect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if she could just escape this need to be the same person she's been all along, she probably could be a successful actress. In the world of the movie, she could be an actress doing these middle-aged roles or older roles, but she doesn't want that. Like and it's not just that she's clinging to youth, but she's clinging to relevance. I mean, there's a lot about women in the entertainment industry and how age is unkind to the way they're perceived, and how it's like there's a lot of stuff going into like Demi Moore throwing herself into this performance this way. Yeah. But I think it's interesting that she's looking for something that you might watch the movie and go, well, she doesn't need any of that. She could just accept beautiful. Getting older, right? Yeah, she looks great.
It's a wild. I mean, and honestly, I love that she challenged herself for something like this. This is clearly impeding upon something that she's dealing with currently. You know what I mean? Like it's gonna directly clash with that, and the fact that she took it on and handled it in such a way that didn't feel like she was trying to be too cool. A lot of people don't do stuff like that, and I just think it's super brave of her to do it.
People say brave about a lot of things that actors do. And then you see this and you're like, no, this is brave. No, really, this is like,
it comes under, it falls into what she's gotten a lot of criticism for too in the last couple of decades. Like she's had her fair share of articles and interviews and reports of like the things that she's gone through in real life to appear young, like the numerous, cosmetic surgery and things that she's done that she's addressed and she's talked about and she's owned and, kind of, openly discusses that stuff, and I mean, she looks incredible. And in this movie is literally, turning that on its ear. Like it's literally talking about, well, when does that go the other direction where, all those years from your youth to where she is in the beginning of this movie, that version of her that Sue existed at some point, and because it's the same consciousness, it's the same person, so her 30 years ago or whatever number of years ago, that's all culminated in the version of her we see at the beginning of the movie is making the decision to go back and do this again and ultimately fucking herself over because of that obsession and that
that's
drive.
A weight to it, man. That's a weight to it. It's like we filled in the
cool.
story for her already because of that. That's really smart, man.
And it's got that image of the star on the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, so good.
That's like such a great image that kind of, even though it's like you might be thinking like, wow, this is really staying with this for a long time. But by the time it gets to the end of it's it's like a Pixar short almost at the beginning of the movie.
You're right. It really is.
But it's like it tells the story of the movie in a strange way, or at least sets you up for what we were saying. Like rather than seeing her career in a bunch of flashbacks, we get the idea of her kind of rise and if not fall, her becoming something that people aren't amazed by anymore, that's got to be tough. I mean, I know that it's like a, vanity or whatever, but it's got to be tough to be hot shit for one day or maybe several days and then wake up one morning and you're just not hot shit anymore. That because you're like, well, I'm not doing any worse. It's not like I'm not trying. I'm just not connecting, Yeah. So no, it's like and I do think it's very much, it does have a lot of added weight because it's a female director and writer. And it's about this subject matter and it's women. I mean, I do think that adds a lot of weight to the movie. But what I think is interesting is everything we've talked about as far as the age matters. It's very relatable to anybody, I think, to understand that idea of just like what your prime is and how to accept that you can't be in that prime forever and that there maybe freedom and happiness exists in letting go of that, Just not giving a shit what they think. But I think when the whole point is when you're an actor, you can't really... you're dependent on people needing more of your flavor specifically. So, and revenge is the only other thing I've seen. Is that the only other thing that Coralie? I don't know how to say her name. Fargeat?
I think. I mean, that's the only one I had heard of. I mean, she's got other stuff on her IMDb, but I'm not familiar. Personally, I'm not familiar with it.
Well, it's pretty extreme and wild too. It does with blood what just Body Horror, this movie does. As far as just like there's so much blood in that movie.
But yeah, that's the one. I mean, again, the day this comes out, if you didn't get to check this in theaters, it may still be in some theaters in a limited release. But yeah, it's coming out today on Halloween. on Mubi. Mubi.
Yeah. Mubi distributed Decision to Leave. That's their first,
Yeah.
one of their first official releases under their label. They decided to do something different. And I know that they put things out like they had like a rental system where you basically pay money and then get a compilation of movies. I thought that was so cool. Like back in the day. But yeah, I picked up Decision to Leave from Mubi.com. It's beautiful. One of my favorite discs I have.
Very cool. What else have you guys seen? Anything else you want to mention?
The English Teacher.
Oh, I've heard it's great.
Incredible.
What?
Dude, I had an exchange with him on Twitter. I forgot to send that guy to you guys. Yeah.
Oh, the actor?
I tweeted something about
like
the soundtrack, like how every episode opens with some amazing song.
So good.
And I was like, how do they not have a playlist for this show? Because like I literally have searched every song the show has opened with. And I have like my own playlist for it. But yeah, Aaron have watched that with me and love that show. Brian Jordan Alvarez, I think, is the star writer director. He at least did some of the episodes. I don't know if he directed all of them, but good mentioning that. I wanted to mention that on a prior episode, but I think we talked about, you guys hadn't watched it yet, or maybe Ron and I talked about it at the movies. That's what is that? That's a FX on Hulu.
Yeah,
kind of
Disney Plus
set up. Yeah.
Yeah, so all the Disney related stuff.
And I'll say the finale of this season, I hope there's more of this show. Please. But the finale of this season, like, it had me in tears. Like I loved it. It was so good.
I was not expecting some other. It's cool, man.
Short season.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's 8 episodes. Is it 8 or 9? Yeah.
I mean, it's short for that kind of show. That feels like the kind of show that they would have the regular networks length seasons for, you know?
Yeah, and I feel like everybody associated with it, with the exception of the principal, who's Enrico Colantoni, is his name?
The guy from Everything.
Yes.
Veronica Mars. Cantanelli or Cantalinelli? Yeah.
Colantoni.
He was also in Galaxy Quest, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. A lot of I don't recognize anybody. Brian Jordan Alvarez, apparently, like, I don't know what his deal is. Like, I was looking him up. I guess he kind of blew up on social media. He has like a YouTube, TikTok history or something. I don't know. I know he was in Megan. I think he was in the reboot of Will and Grace a little bit. Like, he has credits, but I know I was reading a piece on him. I forget which trade put out an article on him, but I guess he came to prominence in the social media era of development. But yeah, I love it.
Well, we've talked about how we're going to do a segment on the Penguin in the future. Maybe when the season is up, Ronald and I are going to do it, since there's no telling when Steve will get around to watching it, because he's part of a marriage pledge to wait and watch the Batman and that with his wife. And that's like, you guys have young kids. That's 11 hours of stuff. That'll be a while before you can commit to that. So we'll talk about the Penguin in a couple of weeks. But there's another show that's been on Max that's been running around the same time as the Penguin. That is, I've been enjoying it. It's taken a while. It's a comedy. The Franchise.
I haven't seen that.
I haven't checked it out yet.
It basically is lampooning the whole superhero era of Hollywood, and it's got like an HBO a budget, you know, so that they can poke fun at these things with a reasonable facsimile of the sets and costumes and stuff that you might expect to see. So it does give you a little bit of a behind the scenes look. It's farcical and silly. It's a little bit like What If Veep, but working on the MCU. It's not quite as dark, and the characters are a little bit warmer maybe than the world of Veep, and what they're trying to do is a little bit more like there might be. I could see how the show can give us a little bit of hopefulness for these characters at times, but it's just a funny. Everybody is a flawed weirdo kind of world, and it's got some great comic performers in it, and it just anything like this is trying to exist in that tone where the dialogue is really clever and it's really fast moving, and sometimes this show really hits the nail on the head and it's amazing, and other times you feel the strain of them trying to establish that tone in this venue, but it always to me ended up being more amusing than kind of full of itself, which would be the danger of anything that's like about entertainment. It's like it's definitely undercutting any grandeur you might have thought that existed. There's so much funny stuff about just how these actors are standing in front of green screens and saying shit where they don't know. Like Billy Magnuson is incredible as this kind of pompous young hot actor who is playing the lead of this film called Tecto, Eye of the Storm, which is a branch of the Centurios franchise. I mean, and there's just, and Richard E. Grant, and it's great because you got Daniel Bruhl as the director and Richard E. Grant as one of the lead actors in it. He's like the respected British actor who's bringing, some kind of like prestige to this movie, but he hates it and has such disdain for it. And but the fact that those actors have been in Marvel projects brings a little bit of extra wink and a nod to this. So I don't know. I was expecting it to maybe be even more brutal about the stuff that it's lampooning. It's more creating like a sitcom atmosphere around the set. So you're getting more like character plot lines than you are necessarily like biting industry satire. But that stuff is there. Aya Cash plays a kind of a producer who's caught between the studio and the production. So I don't know. It's just fun. I think that after a few more episodes, it'll be really easy to see where the comic energy of the show is going. But right now, each episode has taken a kind of like, it starts off at the beginning saying day whatever of 117, and at the beginning of the show, the movie's supposed to take like a month to shoot or half the time to shoot that we know it takes, because each episode starts off and tells you what day of 117 you're doing. So I have a feeling that the arc of the season might be getting to the end of the shoot of this movie. But it's just really cleverly done. And, it's Armando Iannucci behind the scenes. So it's got that imprint of just really smart, British style, fast dialogue comedy. So I'm digging it. And looking here, I'm realizing Sam Mendes has directed an episode. So obviously they're bringing in big talent for this thing,
bringing the heat.
I also will just say I'm totally caught up on What We Do in the Shadows, which is fun as always, and I also just finished the new season of Only Murders in the Building, which was fun and sweet and great as well. So
I got to finish the finale for that one.
Good shows are still good is my subhead.
That's a good takeaway. Yeah. That's a good takeaway. The only one I wanted to mention quickly, it's a Netflix one that just came out, Anna Kendrick's directorial debut. This is called Woman of the Hour.
Oh yeah. Is that a show or a movie?
It's a movie. Yeah,
okay.
It's a movie.
Definitely need to see it.
I thought it was really good. Based on a true story of a serial killer that almost found his or possibly was stalking or looking for a victim on the dating game.
Yeah.
Based on a true story again.
That's
it's told in an interesting kind of non-linear fashion to kind of piece together the trajectory of this, the serial killer's run of terror, I guess. I don't know. Like I didn't know all the details of this story. I'd heard about this, the dating game element of it, but not as much about him and the victims. So the movie spends a nice amount of time, like the dating game thing of it is more of a framing device around that point in his life and among the victims that he had, and it spends equal if not more time in other kind of settings with some of the women that he had murdered in before and after the dating game. So it's really kind of unsettling and kind of it's kind of very tense and kind of suspense. It's just really, really effective and kind of making you uncomfortable in scenes, even if you kind of have an idea of what's going on or where it's going. It's just really effective in kind of making you kind of like, there's moments where you're definitely holding your breath a little bit and like, what's going to happen here? But yeah, for a debut for her, especially, she's in it as well. Thought it was really good, and I know it's been like number one on Netflix for a couple weeks. And definitely would recommend checking that out. Again, that's Woman of the Hour. This is the one that they picked up at TIFF, and just came out a couple weeks ago. So it's on Netflix.
No, I mean, I've been wanting to see that one. I think just because it popped up on Netflix, I wasn't sure that it wasn't a limited series. But when I saw that she had directed it, it reminded me of how much I liked the cinematography that Giovanni Ribisi did for Strange Darling. It just made me think about sometimes these young actors that grow up to get into other areas, like you kind of roll your eyes just a tiny bit at the notion of it. You're like, oh, I guess they're doing that now, you know? But then you're like, well, wait a minute. Maybe they just happen to be around they've been around the industry since they were little.
They know how
maybe they're super fucking talented and they're going to be great, you know? So that's cool. That's cool that it's good.
Yeah, she's been on a bunch of podcasts this week. I guess they're kind of the second wave of marketing for it. Some really interesting things, like talking about like how they made this movie independently, took it to a festival, barely got into the festival in terms of a deadline that they were up against. And, you know, I think Netflix bought it for like $11 million. And she basically said, like, we didn't make money on this movie, or at least, you know, she specifically stating that she didn't make money on this movie from that sale, that like all of the money they made from the purchase, like they donated to like charities for violence against women, a couple different ones that, which I thought was really amazing. And, you know, especially when Netflix writes those checks that they write at these festivals, it's kind of more money than some of these movies may have ever made in theaters. Some not the case, but this is definitely a smaller movie. It's 90 minutes maybe. And to hear that, like, they kind of did that, and to take that kind of success and put it into a charity, which this film is speaking to, is a pretty awesome effort and decision on their part, specifically her. So yeah, another reason just to check it out.
Well, all right,
cool guys. Well, that's an episode. Moviesmovie.com is the website. You can subscribe there for any of the podcast platforms you may prefer to do your podding on. If you want to do the video option, the visual treat that we offer, it's youtube.com/Movie podcast. You can subscribe there. And you know, if you get there and you're like, I changed my mind, I don't want the visuals, you can also just do audio on YouTube as well.
Yeah, these guys are too handsome. I can't
take 3 handsome gentlemen at one time.
Couldn't one of them have been ugly?
I can't turn off a camera because I'm overwhelmed with the beauty here. There's plenty of options for you. We got it all covered, guys. So just come along for the ride. Thank you so much for listening. Again, John's pick for next week is The Blob, the Chuck Russell remake, which is, like we said, available in a lot of places. So you should be able to watch along with us, and we'll talk about it next week. Thank you so much for listening. Happy Halloween. And as always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.